Les comentamos a todos los participantes que las bancas tienen una ubicación personal. Los miembros
To know that they have individual seats,
a cada
and
uno y a
the
cada una
ushers
de
will
ustedes
bring you
hacia
to
su
your seat,
ubicación.
to your assigned seat.
Las
We would
bancas
just like
tienen
to
un
remind you
orden
that
personal.
there is
Los
a
miembros
personal
del ceremonial
allocation
del
of
Congreso
seats,
argentino van a
and
acompañarlos
those
para que
working
cada
for
uno y
the
cada una
Argentine
tome
Congress
ubicación.
can assist all of the members in finding their assigned seat.
Please take a seat and silence your cell phone. I remind you the channel for translation are 1 for German, 2 for English, 3 for French, and 6 for Portuguese. Thank you. ¿Estoy? Por favor, por favor. Pero empiezo con la bienvenida y con todo.
Sí, de
Es
última
algo
cuando
formal.
terminen, sí, cuando terminen los videos haces una pequeña, pero es para que se sienten y ya se ubiquen.
No, ya los ubico. Los invitamos a tomar ubicación, por favor. Please take a seat. Thank you. Para dar inicio a esta nueva jornada de Eurolat 2022.
Eurolat 2022.
Señoras y señores, muy
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. The warmest of welcomes here to the 14th Ordinary Plenary Session of the Euro-Latin American Parliamentary Assembly, Eurolat, that is being held here in the chamber of the Honorable Congress of the nation of Argentina. We will begin now with the message that was sent in by Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Vice President of the European Commission. Here's his message.
Y autoridades reunidas en esta nueva sesión de la Asamblea Eurolat en Buenos Aires. Tienen ustedes mucho trabajo por delante. Así que apenas quiero compartir 3 mensajes. El primero, que creo que es fundamental, que es que aunque Ucrania está ciertamente más cerca de Bruselas que de Buenos Aires, más cerca de Europa que del continente latinoamericano, esa invasión rusa nos afecta.
Nonetheless, the Russian invasion is deeply affecting all of us wherever we may be in the world. And what is happening in Ukraine is going to defend the world that we live in the future. From here in Brussels, I am recording this message ahead of your meeting, and we will see that when you start, and I do hope that this brutal, cruel, unjustified war will have been brought to an end. And let us hope that you will be meeting under conditions of peace. But as things stand today, on the 31st of March, there are 4 million people who have had to flee their country, and many more who are the targets of indiscriminate attacks against civilians. There was a vote in the United Nations. On the eve of that vote, I recalled in the European Parliament that when an aggressor attacks a neighbor who is much weaker, we can't look the other way or go back on our word. Latin America and the Caribbean did not look away. They responded like every other, like all other regions of the world, united in pursuant to the Charter of the United Nations and the territorial integrity of countries. These are the values that unite us, and the peaceful living together is our commitment. Now, this is a commitment that I would like to underscore again in a world in which the war forces all of us to take a moral stand. And we can't forget the fact that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has shaken the global economy, and it has caused food scarcity, food that was previously produced in Ukraine. It has increased the cost of energy, and it has forced the imposing of sanctions to prevent financing of the aggression. And this multinational crisis is spreading around the world, affecting people, millions and millions of people who are very far from the battlefield in Ukraine, and we will be able to exit this crisis if we work together. That's my first message. The second message that I would like to share with you is that now more than ever, we have to strengthen our bi-regional partnership, Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean. And this war has meant that Europeans have taken the decision to establish a geopolitical Europe, and Europe will not be able to be geopolitical if it can't find a way to be closer to Latin America, and in the Latin America and in throughout all of its work, its concerns and its objectives, and to work with Latin America for that. We must work together to come up with a new alliance, a new association that has a bi-regional summit, but that also, and first and foremost, strengthens our association agreements, strengthens our bilateral agreements, constructs, builds agreements, and upholds the values on which we can strengthen our alliance. I'd just like to remind you all that together we represent 1/3 of all of the votes in the United Nations. We can indeed be a decisive force in the world order, and that is why I'd like to invite you, and this is my third message, to come up with a positive agenda for these regions that puts the well-being of citizens at the core of the big transformations of the 21st century, so sustainable development, the digital transition, citizen security, as well as the democratic bolstering of our institutions. These are the foundations of fair and prosperous societies. We want to be able to strengthen our binds and not establish dependencies. We hope to develop a pragmatic and long-term approach. And this is what I am committed to. To achieve this, the voice of parliamentarians is indispensable. I hope, indeed, that Eurolat and its parliamentary dialogue will contribute decisively to strengthening our regions. We both need just that. You, as representatives of the people of both sides of the Atlantic, have the obligation to work tirelessly to achieve this. Thank you for your efforts. You can count on us from the External Action Service of the European Union and from our international relations that are being carried out amongst the European member states and through the European institutions. We will do our part of the work. Thank you very much.
Compartimos ahora el saludo de Roberta Metsola, Presidenta del Parlamento Europeo.
Your Excellencies, co-presidents, dear colleagues, it is a pleasure for me to address the inaugural session of the 14th Euro-Latin American Parliamentary Assembly in Buenos Aires today. Your presence in large numbers from both continents is testimony to the strength of the relationship between the European Union and Latin America, and to our mutual commitment to make our partnership last for years to come. I would like to thank the co-presidents of Eurolat, my European Parliament colleague Mr. Javi Lopez, and Colombian Congressman and member of the Andean Parliament, Mr. Dario Perez, for their leadership on the preparatory works that will make this event a success. A success not only for this plenary, but also in the meetings of the standing committees, the working groups, the Euro-Latin American Women's Forum, and the Executive Bureau. Eurolat is now a well-established and historic bi-regional representative assembly that enjoys privileged relations based on common values, mutual respect, and the belief that together we can work to address global challenges that we all face. To list some of our joint ambitions this week, together, we aim to adopt a declaration on a fair, economic and inclusive recovery. Together, we hope to nail down further trade agreements. Association agreements are the best tool to improve economic and social conditions, reduce disparities in access to education and medical care, all while sustaining common development and climate action goals. Together, to help the post-pandemic recovery process, we will seek to further our economic partnership via the Global Europe International Cooperation Instruments. Together also, we will work to fight against domestic and gender-based violence, which increased worldwide during the pandemic. And to defeat COVID, we will focus on improving vaccination rates with programs such as COVAX. But, dear colleagues, today, more than ever, with war crimes happening on the European continent, I must especially emphasize how important it is that we stand together in defending universal values of democracy, the rule of law, justice, solidarity, and the preservation of fundamental human rights. We stand together in condemning in the strongest possible terms the aggression on Ukraine and the violation of international law that this invasion constitutes. The attack on Ukraine is an attack against everything we believe in. It represents the exact opposite values to those on which the Eurolat Assembly was built on and still worked for. The respect for international law and treaties, for the sovereignty of states, is the only acceptable way to proceed. Multilateralism is the only way. Parliamentary diplomacy and interparliamentary dialogue are today more valuable than ever, and we here in this Assembly are fortunate to be able to enjoy these rights together. Thank you for your attention. I wish you all fruitful onward parliamentary discussions in Buenos Aires. And a special thanks to Javi Lopez for inviting me to address you today. Muchas gracias.
Compone el estrado Javi López, copresidente por el componente europeo de Eurolat, Óscar Darío Pérez Pineda, copresidente del componente latinoamericano Eurolat, Eduardo Chiquilinga, cosecretario del componente latinoamericano de Eurolat, y Daniel Chico Samanillo, cosecretario por el componente europeo Eurolat. Cedemos la palabra al señor
Darío Pérez Pineda first.
Sí, muy buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. Now, would like to send special greetings to my co-president, Javi Lopez, and to all of you. There are more than 100 parliamentarians from both regions, and they are here, and they have brought the best of themselves to make this 14th ordinary plenary session of Eurolat a success. The committees have met, and they have produced results, as have the working groups. There were long debates and deliberations in all of the committees, in the working groups and in the fora, and these form a real guarantee of the excellent and successful work that we have achieved. And we hope then that it will be fruitful. As we have said on many occasions, we hope that it will serve to the benefit of our citizens. The work was not easy. It was extremely difficult. We spent the entire week focusing on this work in this wonderful and hospitable country that has received us with the warmest reception of possible. Now, I would like to avail of this occasion to thank the Argentine authorities for their full engagement and commitment, and to each and every member of their parliament for the excellent organization, for having been so disciplined, have paid attention to even the smallest of detail. That is precisely what has meant that we were able to have the debate and the deliberation under the best conditions possible. And this was seen through the members of the parliament and the Senate and the chamber of the Argentine Congress. We're currently sitting in the chamber of the Chamber of Deputies. And we also received the assistance of the ministers that shared with us in their subject matter, as well as had the opportunity to meet Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner yesterday, the Vice President and President of the Senate, through the inauguration of the session. So we would like to show our gratitude for that that enormous welcome. Now, we don't have much time for a very long agenda. We were unable to start on time because of unforeseen circumstances. Therefore, I should like to get straight to the work of the 14th Ordinary Plenary Session. I wanted to just remind everyone that we have interpretation today. You are also invited, cordially invited, to a toast at the end of this plenary session. Another toast, because we have had others, and it's our Argentine guests, hosts who have invited us to this toast.
Bueno, entonces,
Therefore, the first item on the agenda, Co-President Javi, is adoption of the draft agenda for the ordinary plenary session. Now, this was distributed to all of you in the various languages, and you've all had a chance to see it. May we adopt the draft agenda?
yes.
Good. Thank you. Item 2. Approval of the minutes of the 13th Ordinary Plenary Session of the Eurolat Assembly that took place on the 4th and 5th of November 2020 in Brussels. These draft minutes were distributed to you as well in your files, and therefore you may now assess them. And we put them to your approval. So we will consider the minutes of the 4th and 5th of November 2020 approved. Announcements by the co-presidents of the Assembly, including the decisions taken by the Executive Bureau of April 11th, 2022. The most important points under this item, issues adopted during the Executive Bureau, are as follows. The first, an exchange of views on the joint declaration as proposed by both co-presidents in accordance with Article 18 of the Rules of Procedure under the title of "An Fair and Inclusive Economic Recovery in Peace." In addition, the Executive Bureau adopted the agenda and the organization of work on the committees that took place on Tuesday and Wednesday, and for the work that we will be doing today in the plenary. Specifically, the Executive Bureau adopted, including the presentation and voting on the reports of the 3 standing committees. They are as follows. The report on cooperation in criminal justice and between the EU and Latin America from the Political Affairs Committee, as well as the report on the circular economy from the Sustainable Development and Environment Committee, as well as a report on culture as a conduit to the promotion of relations between the European Union and the Latin American and Caribbean countries from the Social Affairs Committee. Moreover, the Executive Bureau adopted the decision to include 2 resolutions, 2 urgency resolutions for this plenary session. The first is on the impact of COVID-19 on women, and 2 motions for resolution on the Russian aggression of Ukraine. Additionally, we approved the extension of the mandate for the working group on security in organized crime and transnational crime and terrorism. In accordance with Article 4 of the Rules of Procedure, the Executive Bureau established its new composition following the communications received from both components. And finally, the Executive Bureau adopted the work program for the Assembly for the second semester of 2022, deciding to hold an assembly also in cooperation with the Czechia presidency. We'll be holding the rotating presidency of the EU, as well as the Executive Bureau of the 4 standing committees, the working groups on security, terrorism, as well as food security and fighting hunger, as well as the Civil Society Forum and the Women's Forum.
Ok. Muy bien.
Excellent. We are 1 hour behind schedule, and the fact that the meeting did not start at the time we would have hoped, and we've decided therefore to limit the speaking time for all items under for items 4 and 7, so that will be 15 minutes for each item, to be divided as follows. To introduce the debate, the co-presidents will give the floor to the 2 rapporteurs from the 2 components to be able to present briefly their reports for 3 minutes each. And then following that, exceptionally, we will have a few minutes in order to be able to debate the subject. Shall we begin? Let us begin on item 4, which is debate on the report of the Committee on Political Affairs, Security and Human Rights. Cooperation in criminal justice between the European Union and Latin America. And I should like to give the floor first to Fabio Massimo Castaldo, who is the co-rapporteur from the European Parliament, and he will have 3 minutes to present his report.
Adesso funziona. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, dear co-chairs, colleagues, and co-rapporteur, Mr. Spinoza, Fidel Esperino. Before I start, I'd like to just thank Argentina and the Argentine people for allowing us to organize this assembly here in Buenos Aires. And you have provided an excellent welcome for us. We started our work in 2019 on this very important topic. Of course, things have been made more difficult by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has not just had an impact on our liberties and health, but also our ability to keep a check on regional democracy as well as international crime. It's impacted all kinds of state organizations. I'm referring specifically here to the topic of our report on the need to strengthen cooperation on criminal justice in the EU and Latin America. This is a report that was adopted with a broad majority in the Political Affairs Committee and now has to be adopted by this committee. I'd like to thank all of the colleagues who've made proposals that we fed into this report. We look at the roles of how we can improve integration through economic and technological progress, but how this has had a profound impact on all areas that we're dealing with here, both social and economic. And so looking to the near future colleagues, unfortunately we see that illegal activities have also benefited from these types of advances. And often there are loopholes in national legislation or in cooperation. This can lead to specific criminal acts, for example, international terrorism, arms trafficking, drugs trafficking, and human trafficking, as well as corruption and environmental crimes. If I may, I would just like to set out the seriousness of these crimes and the fact that we have to include ecocide on the list of international crimes as soon as possible. And this was suggested by a number of colleagues. This is why international legal cooperation is fundamental in order to consolidate and to defend the rule of law and political democratic systems. These are systems that are still suffering in the post-pandemic period and need to be reformed to fight impunity, which means that justice is denied. When we talk about justice, we can't ignore it. We have to speak with a very clear, united voice. And hopefully this report will be able to represent a very first step towards an international summit that's been called by the EU and our respective summits and the Latin American co-rapporteur in order to have some kind of binding treaty on international criminal cooperation between the EU and Latin America, to have judicial cooperation and cooperation between police systems. Now, we know that there will be political difficulties linked to this idea. However, I believe that we have to send out a very clear message on this, and we can do that today by voting to adopt this report. I can only conclude by thanking you for your friendship and say that we hope we'll be able to take one more step in the very long political path towards cooperation between our countries. As we know, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to our colleague, Massimiliano Sumerillo. Thank you very much. In the committee, we have dealt with urgent topics, fighting, ensuring judicial cooperation and digital technology and democracy. All of these topics are emergencies that have revolutionized our agenda, and then once again we are seeing war on European soil. These are topics which show us the right way, the need to use interregional cooperation and multilateralism in our strategic relations. These types of assemblies are an excellent way of encouraging inter-parliamentary dialogue between our countries. However, we also have to strengthen intergovernmental dialogue. Therefore, we hope that the high-level CELAC summit will take place as soon as possible. We have to unite in order to ensure that we're more effective in fighting poverty and inequality. These have all been worsened by the post-pandemic crisis. We have to ensure that we have better public policies and inclusive public policies that will defend our people and common goods. We have to have solidarity and cooperation in economic fields in order to promote a new development model. But we also have to have diplomatic, social and cultural ties. That we have to focus on research and fighting climate change and gender equality, as well as human rights, and with a focus on the most vulnerable. I'm sure that if we work in this direction and we rejoin our efforts between countries, we represent a third of the UN member states. We'll be able to help to bring about a fairer, more just society. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I would just say that the voting on the draft resolution will take place under point 8 of today's agenda. We now move on to the debate of the Committee on rights of young people, children, and culture. And I give the floor to Sandro Pereira from Portugal.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Co-President. Well, this is a report on culture as a means of promoting relations between the European Union and the Latin America and Caribbean countries. And so this means that culture should be assured for all citizens in terms of creative works, as well as being able to enjoy that. Culture can be a source of job growth and also increase the quality of life of citizens. It can be a source for economic wealth. Having said that, we should not use the business or profitability logic as a way of judging the culture. It is a source of diversity, and this is fundamental. We need to have states that will give support to culture and arts, as well as make sure that there is good access to culture. Culture plays an extremely important role in social inclusion, as well as in supporting the diversity of people. In this sense, culture and cultural diplomacy is an instrument with an enormous amount of potential in terms of foreign relations of countries, and the final objective should be to share knowledge as well as to promote a friendship between peoples. Specifically, promoting culture is and should continue to be, as much as possible, a essential element of developing relations between the EU and its member states and Latin America and the Caribbean on the other side. And this should also always be based in mutual respect amongst sovereign and free people that have rights, as respecting their specificities and their cultural particularity. Now, the draft report, well, we had the pandemic in the meantime, and we would like to really draw the attention to the difficulties that COVID-19 posed for culture, and a number of amendments therefore were tabled to this end, and they were adopted. We must recognize also linguistic diversity as well as indigenous communities. Now, we believe that the report has been improved by these amendments and others. Other parts were deleted, for example, where there was any sort of reference to marketing of culture or the property or issues related to property. So there are three amendments that will be put to the plenary and that will then impact the final version of the text. We believe that the culture and artistic realm should be strengthened between both sides, the European Union and Latin America and the Caribbean on the other, and it should be a strategic driver for both regions of the world. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Alicia Lizeth Ticona from Parlatino, Bolivia.
Sonido allá.
Ñawpaypi kay hatun ñapaykuy chayamusij kankunapaj kuraj kamachi parlamentarias Bolivia suyu sutimpi kinsay chunkan sujtayniyuj pueblos indígenas originarios campesinos suyu sutimpi. Saludos a todos y a todas, señores parlamentarios.
Members of Parliament, please receive greetings from our plural national Republic of Bolivia and our 36 nations. Now, culture in a global, regional, and local world through certain systems of supranational governance has an influence on the agenda and the use of certain cultural instruments outside of the governments, and sub-state stakeholders, for example, also have an impact. In transnational networks have an important role to play in international culture. Countries and peoples of the European Union are united with the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. There are historical, spiritual, and cultural roots that unite us and that share the values of solidarity, human rights, freedom, and of course, rule of law. For that, we need to work in a united fashion in promoting culture internationally and specifically on this report on culture as a means of promoting relations between the European Union and the Latin American and Caribbean countries. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Now, on this item, a request for the floor has been made. Iban Garcia del Blanco has requested the floor, and he shall have it for 2 minutes.
Sí, se oye, sí.
Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, I wanted to avail of this opportunity to congratulate both rapporteurs on a report that I think is crucial. It focuses on and combines two essential aspects of the cultural sector. Now, we have to, of course, look at the specificity of the individuals and how societies begin to interact. And this, of course, must focus on the protection, hopefully substantial enough, of the peoples, and look also at what unites us and points in common to cooperate, to be able to have a multiplying effect of what culture can achieve, and sharing knowledge, and also giving a deeper interpretation of who we are. Now, this is a report that does combine the perspective of culture and creative work as a source of wealth, such that our societies can grow. Now, in the European Union, culture and the creative industry accounts for more than 30% of our GDP. And that means that we could have a great opportunity to cooperate on both sides of the Atlantic to really harness the possibilities of culture. Along these same lines, I believe that this report really focuses positively on protecting the rights of those who have created original works, to safeguard them so that their works are not expropriated from them illegally, so that we can protect these creative works, which is a good in of itself. We also need to look more at harmonizing in terms of IP legislation. To conclude, I'd like to thank everyone and really also thank the organizers for having given us amazing experience in the best conditions possible in Argentina and in Buenos Aires. And in fact, many of us said that we would come back as soon as we possibly can, because there's something really special here in Buenos Aires. So thank you again.
Muchísimas gracias, Iván.
Thank you, Ivan. Again, the voting on this draft resolution will take place under point 8 of today's session. We now move on to the debate on the report from the Sustainable Development, Environment, Energy Policy and Research, Innovation and Technology Committee, and this is on the circular economy. I'll give the floor to Clara Eugenia Aguilera. She has been an excellent co-rapporteur. She can take more time because she can take my turn because I'm here chairing the meeting. So please go ahead, Clara. Thank you very much to the co-chair and co-rapporteur who worked with me on this very important report on the circular economy. I'd like to start by thanking all of the Latin American component. It's been a pleasure to have a meeting in person with all of you. And I'd like to in particular thank the Argentine side and their institutions who have helped us and who have made for such a wonderful mission here. As my co-rapporteur said, Oscar Dario Perez, we started this report just before the pandemic in 2019. And there we were wanting to make progress. We continued to work because it was very important to work towards putting an end towards excessive consumption in the world. The pandemic paralyzed the world for 2 years, and following that we see it's all the more necessary to look at excessive consumption that has been that has marked certain sectors of society over recent decades. I think we are all realizing that natural resources are finite. And so we cannot continue to use and throw things away at the same rate as we have been. We have to look at the fact that things are moving now, although there's still a lot of work to do. In Europe, we've seen significant legislative changes. However, more effort does have to be made. We can't pretend that our resources are never going to run out. We have to look at the environment, at natural resources. They will run out. Everything will run out at the end. So we have to put an end to excessive consumption in our societies. And that's why the circular economy is so important. It can help to transform the manufacturing process and move it from a linear procedure whereby you produce, use and throw away, and it can be transformed into a more circular process. And in this, the product can have a new useful lifespan. Rather than using something and throwing it away, we try to give this object, this item, a second life. And that's a better way to protect our environment. So we have to make a significant shift, both in terms of legislation, but also with education for the whole of society, to change the way in which things are seen, and therefore also our environment. Yes, we have to reduce, and that's not easy. However, we need commitment from all institutions. And this is why this report is so important, to have a commitment from this Eurolat Assembly to ensure this type of shift. It's going to take time, but at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we make better use of the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. These are all important and points that we should be trying to implement. They will help to lead us towards a better society. I don't have much more to add. I would just say that the Sustainable Development Committee saw 13 amendments tabled. I'd like to thank Adolfo Rodriguez Sá, who presented almost all of these amendments and helped to greatly improve the report through his contributions. Thank you, Adolfo. And I think that's on behalf of all of us. All of the amendments were adopted and incorporated into the text, which was thereby improved. And together with my co-rapporteur, Oscar Dario Perez, I hope that we will have broad support for this report, because we have a huge amount of responsibility towards our societies. We have to change our lifestyles and our consumption methods. For our environment, for the natural world, it's going to be much more healthy. Thank you all very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Clara Eugenia.
Thank you very much, Clara. I was co-rapporteur on this report. I'm sitting here now, but I just want to make a very brief comment. This is a huge challenge. We very much were pleased to see the adoption of the circular economy package in the European Parliament, and it's something that we need to reproduce here. I think it was an excellent initiative. Just by way of data, the EU, in the EU as a whole, only 40% of goods are recycled. In Latin America, however, it's only 3%. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us. The circular economy won't just have an environmental impact, however, it will also have an economic impact as well. We have to ensure that we have smart, inclusive production. That's going to be key to modern society. So, Clara, I very much welcome the fact that you've drawn attention to such an important topic. This draft resolution will be voted on under point 8 of today's agenda. Udo Bullmann has asked to take the floor on this point.
Honourable co-presidents, thank you very much. My congratulations, dear colleagues, go to the co-rapporteurs for having brought to this plenary an excellent report. But please allow me also to honour Alindo Chinaglia, my co-chair of the Standing Committee, for bringing permanently fresh ideas into our work. I will mention some of them later. I'm deeply convinced that the future of our two continents is only achievable in a compass of sustainable development, following the Agenda 2030 of sustainability. And that means we need a new economic model, we need a decent future for all, sustainable economy, a nature that is not threatened by our economic model and that is protected, and social inclusion for the benefit of all. This report is a milestone on regional empowerment, economic empowerment, which we urgently need, and therefore we recommend it to be voted here in the plenary. New ideas have been discussed in our committee. Challenges to ensure the human right to water is prepared and can be followed up very soon. A universal declaration of the rights of nature, and a new issue, impacts of pesticides on human health and the environment. We commend the new issues to the Bureau for further decisions. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Udo.
Thank you, Udo. I've been chairing up to here, and now I'll give the floor to our co-chair, Javi Lopez. Thank you very much, co-chair Oscar Dario. I'll now explain the methodology for voting on the urgency resolutions. We'll be moving ahead with the vote, and we will also have the presentation of the debates in the working groups. On the urgency resolutions, I would like to inform the members that the deadline for amendments to the urgent resolutions under Article 8, Paragraph 3 of the regulations is the 12th of March 2022. And so that has allowed us to have joint resolutions this week. We have two topics that were looked at in the Executive Bureau. One was the war in Ukraine and Russian aggression. Here there are 4 motions for resolution, and then one on the impact of COVID-19 on women. And this has been worked on the Women's Forum, and we hope that they will be able to explain that as well on their point. On the 4 draft resolutions on the war in Ukraine, I would remind you that we have one based on the UN text and put forward by various members of the European Parliament, and which has been signed by a number of Latin American members as well. Secondly, this is chronological order. Secondly, we have a resolution put forward by 3 groups of the European Parliament. Thirdly, a proposal signed by a number of Latin American members. And fourthly, a first proposal, which came in first, and this is from a political group from the European Parliament. And that was what led to us having this debate in recent weeks and recent days. So there are 4 draft resolutions. In the first and third, there have been signatures, about 15 signatures put forward, which is necessary to have a vote per component. This means that one component will vote then the second, and you need to have majority on both sides. So I'll explain the voting method. If a resolution is adopted, then the others will fall.
Las 4 por componentes, nuestra petición. Disculpa, si puedes usar el micro.
No quiero.
What we are putting forward is that you're going to vote in the order that you suggested, but the 4 motions for resolution should be voted on by component. If one is passed, then the others don't need to be voted. But if the others are voted, because we don't get the necessary majority per component to be adopted, it should be the same procedure for each. This is, I think, how the Latin American component had intended to handle the votes. Okay. So 4 proposals, draft resolutions with signatures, and there'll be a vote per component for the 4. So we're going to vote separately. I will alternate the order of vote per side. So that was the methodology, how we're going to vote. And having said that, we now move on to the next point, which is the vote. Point 8, which is vote on the draft resolutions, including on the reports put forward by the 3 standing committees. So that was the methodology. We have the urgency resolutions on the 2 topics, the 4 that we have for Ukraine and the other on COVID and gender. We'll start with the vote on the motions of resolution that have just been introduced by colleagues coming from our committees. The Political Affairs, Security and Human Rights Committee, there is a draft resolution on criminal justice in the EU and Latin America. There were no proposed amendments, and so we vote on the resolution as a whole. Votes in favour to the resolution.
Votos en contra.
Votes against. Abstentions.
Quedaría aprobada.
The draft resolution is adopted.
Enhorabuena a los ponentes, tanto.
Congratulations to the rapporteurs, Mr. Castaldo and Mr. Espinosa. Now, the social, youth, child affairs, and as well as education and culture, with the draft report, culture to promote relations between the EU and Latin American and Caribbean countries. There were 3 amendments in plenary to the draft to the motion for resolution. So we're voting on the amendments that were put to plenary for this report. Para 10, Amendment 1. Votes in favour. Votes against. Abstentions. Adopted. Amendment 2, Para 13, votes in favour. Votes against. Abstentions. Adopted. Amendment 3, Paragraph 23, votes in favour. Votes against. Abstentions. Adopted. And now we move to the vote for the resolution as a whole. Votes in favour. Votes against. Abstentions. Adopted. The motion for resolution is adopted, and congratulations to Sandra Pereira from the European side, as well as Elisa Gijona from the Latin American side. Congratulations on the adoption of your report. We now move on to the 3rd motion for resolution, which is from the reports done by the committees. Here it's sustainable development, environment, energy, policy, and research, innovation, and technology. And this is the motion for the draft report on the circular economy. This is by rapporteurs Clara Aguilera, Oscar Dario Perez. No amendments, and so we vote on the resolution as a whole. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? The report is adopted. Congratulations to both of the co-rapporteurs.
Pérez. Así pasaríamos a...
Then we will move on to the vote on the draft motion for resolution on urgencies. So we will begin by looking at the first urgency resolution, which is the impact of COVID-19 on women. 9 amendments were tabled, and we will now put them to the vote. And then we will vote on the resolution as a whole.
Por favor, Julia.
Julia? Thank you, Co-President, members of Parliament. Samira was a co-rapporteur with me on this, and she too will address this subject, but I thought it was important to thank everyone who helped us in working on this for 2 years, but from both the Latin American and the European side. And they worked so hard on this motion for resolution during the pandemic. We had to have virtual debates, women from both continents who contributed to the proposal that we are putting to you today. Therefore, I should like to really thank them all, and I hope that you will all do so with us as well. Samira, would you like to take the floor as well? They are the 2 co-rapporteurs on this motion for resolution. Go ahead.
Gracias, estimado presidente.
Thank you, Co-President. How long do I have? 3 minutes?
Digamos, una pequeña presentación.
A short presentation, and then you can explain the work of the group. It's a great pleasure for me to present this motion for a resolution for an urgency from the Women's Forum on the impact on women of COVID-19. So I'd like to begin by thanking all of the members, political parties that took part in the drafting of this working document during the last forum and working on this urgency. It was a very in-depth process. I'm extremely proud of what we are presenting, and we saw COVID-19 didn't impact all in the same way. We also saw that there were structural deficiencies that exist around the world, in, for example, social, economic divides, as well as between men and women. And what we're discussing here in this motion, urgency resolution is that big divide that is getting wider with all of the existing divides. Now, women in all of their diversity were highly impacted by the pandemic. Not only do they make up the majority of healthcare professionals, but they also have an additional load in terms of the gender roles that persist. Having said that, we know that they are the minority in decision-making positions. They were on the front line during the health crisis. And what did they receive in exchange? Gender-based violence against women increased around the world. Access to sexual and reproductive health and rights were limited. And women were on the front line, and that meant that they also were more likely to get COVID. In Europe, women even lost their jobs at a higher level. All of the jobs that were destroyed during the pandemic, 40% of those jobs were lost by women. During the economic recovery, women did not reach economic recovery as quickly as and with the same strength as men. Black women too have even more problems to find new jobs, and this is absolutely unacceptable. Women deserve to have access to all health and social services. They deserve to be full-fledged parts of our economies wherever they would choose to work, and receive fair wages that is commensurate with the work they do. Now, women should also be free of violence and intimidation and be a part of public decision-making to make their own decisions about their bodies and their future. We know that the consequences of the pandemic were uneven. We shan't accept that women's economic recovery be unequal. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Samira. Now, let us move to the vote, to the amendments on the draft motion for a resolution on the impact of COVID-19 on women. Amendment 4, paragraph 2. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 5, paragraph 3. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Amendment 6, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Amendment 7, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Amendment 8, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Amendment 9, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Carried. On the recitals, we have an amendment as well. Amendment 1 on recital 2, in favor. Against. Abstentions. Carried. Amendment 2 on recital C, in favor. Against. Carried. 3, Amendment 3 in favor. Against. Carried. Now we will vote on the resolution as a whole. In favor. Against. It is adopted. And so congratulations to Julia and Rafaela.
¿Me recuerdan que no hemos tenido abstenciones?
I would just like to recall that there are no abstentions during the vote. Now, we will look at the 4 motions for resolution that are in cascade. If one is adopted, then the others will fall. So we are looking first at the joint motion for resolution on Russia aggression against Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. In this sense, we're going to spend a little bit more time on the vote because we would like to have a detailed result, and we need to have a result per component, which means that in the 4 cases there will be a per component vote, because this is a case in which we have a vote on a component basis.
Si podéis levantar todos la...
If you could all raise your hands, then we could count how many are present. Please, members of Eurolat who have voting rights, please raise your hands. So only those who are accredited and that have a voting right.
¿Qué? Vale. Me indican los servicios de la...
The chamber says that we have 77 Eurolat present with that are accredited and with a voting rights and recognized as such. So after having checked this, let's move to the vote. Now let us do this on a component basis. So the first joint motion for resolution that is signed by both components, based on the UN resolution on the war in Ukraine. So a vote on a component basis. First, the European component. In favor?
¿Votos en contra?
Against?
¿Abstenciones?
Abstentions? Okay. Now we will have the Latin American component vote, and then we will tell you the results. So on this component, in favor of the resolution? votes in favor.
Por favor, podéis levantar.
Please raise your hands.
Catorce, 15, 16, 17. Yo conto. Votos en contra.
Against?
Abstenciones.
Abstentions?
Vale. Entonces, el resultado.
The result for the 33 in favor, 1 against, and no abstentions. That's the European. In Latin America, 17 in favor, 22 against, and 1 abstention. Therefore, it is not adopted. And so let's move to the next motion for resolution. We will have a vote by component, and we know that the number per component is 77, but both components must vote in favor for it to be adopted. In this case, the Latin American component had 17 votes in favor, 22 against, and 1 abstention. Therefore, the Latin American component rejected the motion, and therefore it cannot be adopted. And the European the European component knows that it was 33 in favor. Second vote. We will vote on the joint motion for resolution of the various groups of the chamber after they agreed on the first proposal for the resolution. So there are some signatories from the European Parliament that represent the political groups: Leopoldo Lopez, Javi Lopez, Jordi Cañas, Fabio Massimo Castaldo, and others. So we will alternate now the vote. We will start with the Latin American component first. Vote in favor of this motion for resolution.
Es la europea.
It's the European one with amendment that were agreed on amongst the groups. So there are 4 motions, one amongst groups from the both components, based on the UN resolution that was just voted on. The second, there was one that was agreed on between political groups of the European Parliament, and a third resolution that was tabled by colleagues from the Latin American component, and a fourth motion for resolution was the original proposal that is from the European People's Party that was signed by Leopoldo Lopez. That was the first that was put forth that meant that there was a debate and further joint motions for a resolution and other amendments, and that is what we did. So the second vote on the motion for resolution agreed on a number of different political groups from the European Parliament. In favor? We will vote on the Latin American component first, because we are flipping the order each time, so to alternate. Otherwise, it's the same order. That's the only reason we're doing it this way this time. So in favor? Against. Abstentions.
Espera, votos en contra.
So we will count the votes against. Can we count again? Against. Against the motion for resolution.
Vale. Ahora la dimensión europea. ¿Votos a favor de la propuesta de resolución?
So votes in favor of the joint motion for resolution on the European component.
¿Votos en contra?
Against.
¿Votos en contra?
Against. Abstentions. Perfect.
En este caso quedarían la dimensión latinoamericana, 2 votos favorables, 21 contrarios.
21 against, 6 abstentions.
The 33 votes in favor for the European component and 1 against. Now, the third motion for resolution and was presented by the Latin American component with signatures from the Latin American component. Again, we will shift the order for the votes. So first, the European component will vote. We'll vote on this motion for resolution. In favor? Against? Abstentions?
¿Había un voto favorable o...?
Vote in favor of a vote.
Perfecto.
Perfect. Now, we have a vote in favor. 1 vote in favor. 1 vote in favor.
Vale, vale.
And 1 abstention.
Vale, perfecto.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, the Latin American component. In favor?
¿Votos en contra?
Against? Votes in favor, we're going to have to count them one by one, please. We know what the result is, but we want to count. In favor. In favor. We would like to have an exact detailed vote. In favor.
¿Votos en contra?
Against.
¿Abstenciones?
Abstentions.
Serían 36.
36.
Serían
36 votes in favor, 6 abstentions, and no votes against on the Latin American component. And it was 32 votes against for the European component, 1 in favor, and 1 abstention. And therefore, the motion for resolution has not been adopted, is not adopted.
Y ahora pasaríamos.
Now, we move to the 4th motion for resolution. That was the original motion presented by, tabled by on behalf of the EPP group by Leopoldo Lopez. We will vote on the Latin American component first. Those in favor of this joint motion for resolution.
Tres. Votos.
Against.
Abstenciones.
Abstentions?
En este caso está.
In this case, we will now turn to the European component, and then we will give the final result. So in favor of the joint motion for resolution.
Votos en contra.
Against?
Abstenciones.
Abstentions?
En este caso sería.
In this case, Latin America 3, 25 against, and 14 abstentions. European component 32 in favor, 2 against, and no abstentions. Therefore, it has not been adopted. So this motion, the fourth, has not been adopted either. So that brings the votes to an end on the urgency resolutions, and that brings us to item 10. So on the component vote on Russia, the resolution on impact of COVID on women was adopted. So 10, presentation of the results of the Euro-Latin American Forum, Women's Forum. Now we could give the floor to Julia first.
Presidente.
Thank you very much, Co-President. It's very kind. We had an extremely important meeting of the Women's Forum here in Eurolat with a panel on sexual health and reproductive rights of women. And we had a very broad overview of all aspects of this with all political schools of thought, as well as academia, civil society, media. They were all present, and they gave us a broad view of what the situation is in our countries in terms of sexual and reproductive rights and health of women, and also in Europe, so in Latin America and in Europe. So the participation and the work that we did in it as a whole was extremely diverse. We listened to all the different voices, and that has meant that the forum, Mr. Co-President, has been bolstered yet further. And there were several proposals from women also who were not panelists, but who came to the discussion and to also give their perspective that was different. Now, from now until the next plenary, we will be working on this. President and colleagues will focus specifically on the need and even urgency to have a gender committee and a women's committee and a diversity committee here in Eurolat, a standing committee. So you saw the report, and Samira presented that. It was very blunt about what the situation of women is, what the situation of COVID was, and what that has meant for women to consistently lose their jobs, to not have any assistance with care. We saw this with COVID. We saw that women were in care roles for the elderly and for families. Majoritarily speaking, women took care of that, and a lot of jobs and rights were lost, Mr. President. Therefore, henceforth we shall work to make a request to the Executive Bureau to amend the rules of procedure to establish a standing committee that could address these issues on a regular basis. So to the both co-presidents, I want to just remind you that the work was really hard, and women, and I really do want to focus on one point, there were different political ideologies. Nonetheless, we all had the same point of view that we would continue to fight for women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, and to uphold their diversity, as well as the LGBTQ communities that were very on board with our proposals as well. That's all. Thank you.
Gracias, Julia. Ahora tenía...
Thank you, Julia. We'll hear from the European component. Samira, please, take the floor.
Gracias, presidente. Sí, la salud sexual y reproductiva.
Sexual and reproductive health of women has been at the heart of the Women's Forum's meetings. During the parliamentary meetings of both components, we had experts and representatives of feminist movements present to exchange good practices and experiences on both continents. This has allowed the forum to draw a number of conclusions. Sexual and reproductive health rights for women is a human right. Countries have a duty to respect, protect and fulfill all rights linked to the sexual and reproductive life of women. Sexual education has to be accessible to children and teenagers in order to ensure that all adults are freer to choose their sexual life without repression. The laws on this have to be under constant public scrutiny in order to ensure that it will be effectively applied and that all women will have access to them, both in rural areas and in urban areas. Women's involvement in political decision-making procedures or other processes, for example, for conflict resolution, has to be guaranteed and protected. And finally, last but not least, it's important for media to avoid repeating gender stereotypes. The meeting concluded with a unanimous proposal for the forum to be converted into a full committee of the Eurolat Assembly. I would like to thank all members and rapporteurs and speakers who were invited to participate. I thank them all for their contributions, and I hope to be able to meet you in the next Women's Forum. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Samira.
Thank you, Samira, for that presentation. And now give the floor to Evelyn Regner. Go ahead, please.
Here it works. Strong messages from strong women in the Women's Forum. It is once more really a pleasure to be there because there are so strong commitments and one feels this strong energy amongst all the representatives from Latin America both and from the European Union. SRHR, sexual reproductive health and rights. This is really going to the core on what we deal here. It's about a fundamental right. It's about self-determination. Every girl, every woman has to be in the position to decide on her own when, how, with whom, however she does have sex, and this needs a lot of education. So we had an excellent input on how this could be done, because we heard so much progress in the positive sense has been done in countries over Latin America, also in Europe, but we heard excellent on how was happening and is happening in Chile, in Argentina, but also in other countries. And then there is strong legislation, and this legislation also has to be implemented. It has to be lived, and therefore it needs networks. It needs the state commitment also to implement and really live that, and it needs the participation of teachers, of peer-to-peer education, but of course also in everything creating networks. We had our resolution on COVID and the impact on women, and there we see there is a huge rise on violence against women. So the silence has to be broken when women are hit, when they are confronted with domestic violence. So also here, an input also on the state side, where to go, which phone number to dial, which network to contact. Finally, of course, SRHR is also about trans identity. It is about improving legislation on same-sex partnerships. And therefore, the conclusion is a lot has been done, but it is among all those strong women in Latin America and in Europe to fight, to defend what has been achieved, and to fight strong against pushbacks, against the negative influences that have been happening and are happening all over the world too.
Muchísimas.
Thank you, Evelyn. With that, we move on to point 11. This is presentation of the results of the meeting of the Civil Society Forum. And I'll give the floor to Mark Angel, who has asked for the floor.
Okay, now it works. Thank you very much, President, for giving me the floor. It's so important that we politicians come together with civil society. And yesterday we had an interesting meeting with the trade unionists discussing the importance, when we talk about trade policy, the role of trade unions to protect workers' rights. I think it was very interesting, the talks we had. But we also had very interesting talks with NGOs, and we had a subject, we dealt with a similar subject as the Women's Forum. We talked about the LGBTI rights in Europe and in Latin America, and it was very interesting also to learn from Argentina. We all know that Argentina was the first country in the world to have a law on gender identity. In Europe, we are following that, and I think it's important because LGBTI rights, just like women's rights, are under threat from the internationally well-organized anti-gender movement, and we have that movement on both on our continents, and they want to bring us back into patriarchy, and I think therefore we have to stand together and defend women's rights, LGBTI rights, because they are human rights. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Alejandro Carlin now has the floor.
Perdón.
No, disculpa. Debería pasar al otro responsable del componente. Disculpa.
Sorry. First of all, the other co-chair from the Latin American component, and then ask for the floor.
Alfredo Cornejo.
Alfredo Cornejo.
Alfredo Cornejo. Well, I would like to inform you about this forum. We looked at the absence of women on the three panels, and I think I should inform you of that. So this is something that we need to take into account for the next meeting. And we've taken good note of this fact. Going through the agenda, there was an exchange of views of the Economic and Social Committee, Josep Pachau, and the International Labour Confederation with Mr. Gerardo Martínez. Both speakers made comments on the need to analyse and come to common solutions on issues relating to the world of work, and to look at it from a worker's point of view as well as employer's point of view, that it should be a joint view. This should tackle environmental issues, food insecurity or food security as an objective, inequalities, and gender issues. The other discussion was on the role of trade unions in the Mercosur negotiations. It was Alfredo Belis, who is a member of parliament in Mercosur, and other trade unionists who set out the need to establish policies that will strengthen the rights of the most vulnerable in the post-pandemic period, and with particular focus on the need to strengthen the role of formal work. Those who took the floor expressed similar sentiments. We also covered climate change amongst other topics. And comments were made that the agenda should also include a commitment to looking at future topics. We also drew attention to persecution of environmental activists in a number of Latin American countries. The third panel looks at LGBTI rights in Latin America and the EU. We had heard from Fernando Barel, who works in Latin America, and Alba Rueda, who is an activist, a trans activist, and a member of the Argentine government. We also heard that Latin America and the Caribbean and the EU are reference points when it comes to diversity. Despite the fact that there are emergencies facing a large number of LGBTI people around the world facing violence and even death and other types of discrimination, although some objectives have been reached in some countries. A number of people set out the advances that have been made in the region, and we all said that this progress needs to be strengthened and made more widespread. There was very active participation from the members on this panel, and I would like to thank everyone who made a contribution on behalf of the co-chairs. It's the first time I've participated in this forum, and if I may, co-presidents, I would just like to say it's not a good message when we aren't looking at the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because of bureaucracy and rules, it means that a forum like this has not been able to say anything about this invasion. And I wanted to take this opportunity to set that out.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Alfredo. Two people are asking for the floor. Alejandro Carlin first, then Adolfo Mendoza. First speaker, please.
Ahí está. Bueno,
It's an honor for me to be here with all of you, with this highly qualified representatives of both Europe and Latin America. In 2018, it was suggested that the next round should be in Argentina, and here we are, and we're very satisfied with that. Hopefully you've all been very happy here. But on the topics that we're discussing here, we wanted to have the possibility for workers' movements, particularly workers, to participate in a committee or looking at a committee on the topic of work. The forum in this Eurolat meeting, I think, does really show that there should be ongoing permanent participation between civil society and unions from the two continents, because they've been able to make a huge contribution. I think that's because what we're doing here is trying to improve the quality of life for our citizens, to create work for our citizens so that they can meet their needs and have better opportunities. And I don't think that the workers' movement can be left out of that. Then picking up on what was said by the previous speaker, I would just like to emphasize something that was said by Pope Francis. He said that humanity, well, wars don't start with people. We have to ensure that we look at the interests of all. Using arms is not what God wants. We have to look at the ordinary people who want peace, and how in all wars, it's the people who are the victims. They pay the price of war with their own flesh. God is with those who want peace and not those who use violence. War should not be used to oppress other people or to solve international conflict. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having this opportunity to allow our people to share their opinions and to make recommendations that will feed into our work. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tiene la palabra Adolfo Mendoza, por favor.
Next speaker, please. Thank you, Chair. Civil Society Forum. Eurolat is part of the democratic development matrix. We are elected officials, elected by a popular vote, directly or indirectly, but that's how it happens. However, when we have fora such as the Women's Forum, we should also be looking at removing the patriarchy, because we're transforming states, and to do that we have to transform the state based on patriarchy. It's not just a question for women, it's a question for absolutely everyone, all of us. However, these two fora, women and civil society, are spaces which allow us to think about how we can deepen and breathe life in democracy around the world. Is it the best form of government? What we should be looking at is what is the best form of government in a democracy. And civil society are suggesting intercultural democracy, all types of different democracy. And so I welcome the fact that these fora have allowed us to use them as mechanisms for participative democracy, and we should be strengthening them. We should also be strengthening them with the proposals, as our colleague said, in the Social Affairs Committee, that in the Andean Parliament, under our member Miriam Cisneros, who took the initiative on this, Ramarelis and Marta Ruiz, and now Faustino Olisco, amongst others, the need to find some kind of institutions in order to work on the needs of the indigenous people and those of African descent. If I may, co-chairs, I think we should be looking at our association with CELAC as well. In Mexico, and this is linked to CELAC, at the beginning of May, there's going to be the World Social Forum. And what we're doing here, in terms of the Women's Forum or the Civil Society Forum, should also be translated to that global event that will be happening in Mexico. And so we should make the most of our links and integration with CELAC. So therefore, what I'm suggesting is that we allow our co-chairs to manage or do the specific management that's needed in order to ensure that the work that's been done in these fora isn't just a declaration or a statement, but should actually feed into the citizens' debate in the World Social Forum that will take place in Mexico. That was my proposal. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. I'll now give the floor to Mr. Proaste. Thank you. I would like to just welcome the efforts that we've seen over a long period of time. There's always the good and the bad in these meetings. We always want to light our path and see, work on our fundamental principles. We have to accept that justice, knowledge, human rights are fundamental principles that should light our path. They have to light our parliaments. Defending human rights is one that we should provide whenever it is regressing and under any circumstances. And although we have light, there is also dark. And that is that we should have had a broad resolution without generating any doubts on a fundamental principle in all of our countries, which is that human rights must be respected, and this is a fundamental principle in any country. Significant progress has been made in this assembly, looking at food security, incorporating issues that are important to shine a light on. The gender gap, for example. However, Chair, what's important is that women should have their voices heard on this. We have to be players. We have to play a role. And so putting an end to the state of patriarchy means that we also have to speak up for our own causes, and we have to be the protagonists and raise up our voices for our legitimate claims. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, senadora Provost.
Thank you very much. We now conclude this point, the presentation of the results of this civil society fora, and we move on to any other business. If there is no other business, I would just like to remind you that on Monday, between the executive committee debates, it was adopted the co-president's statement. That's the text that's circulating now. And that was adopted by both of us and sets out the main key areas of debate that we've had over recent days. And it also refers to the war in Ukraine. We now move on to point 13, the date and place of the 15th ordinary plenary session of the Eurolat Assembly. I would remind you that in autumn of this year, it should take place, well, the Bureau and the 4 standing committees should be held in Europe, as well as the working groups and the fora. The European component, we'll think about how, where, when we're going to organize that. And without further ado, I would ask for a 5-minute break. And then we will have the closing session. The Argentine authorities have invited us here, and they have been with us throughout our work. Mr. Sa, the Foreign Affairs Committee, both from the Congress and the Senate. I think we just need a 5-minute break. Don't go far away. 5-minute break, and then we'll have the closing session. And that won't take too much time. Thank you.
Agradecemos su participación en el
And to thank you all for participating. We'd like to thank the secretariats for the Latin American side, Mr. Chiquilinga, and for the European component, Chico Samilinga. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remaining seated. There will be a very brief closing panel. The co-chairs, Javi Lopez and Oscar Dario Perez Pineda, will also be participating in it, as well as Adolfo Rodriguez Sae and Eduardo Valdez.
Los invitamos a tomar ubicación para dar inicio entonces a este breve panel de cierre.
This brief closing session. Members of Parliaments,
Los invitamos y les invitamos a tomar ubicación, por favor.
please take your seats.
Thank you.
Por aquí.
Muchas gracias. Hola.
Lo acabo de ver.
otra vez faltaría una.
Les recordamos que luego
I would just remind you that after the closing panel, we'll have a toast. And we will invite you to enjoy a performance by the Congress Orchestra. It's an honor for us to welcome all of you, members of the Eurolat Parliament, who are coming to from both Latin America and Europe. So we'll have the closing panel, we'll have the introduction of the chamber orchestra of the Argentine Congress, and then a toast in the blue salon.
nuevamente los invitamos a tomar ubicación.
Once again, I ask you to take your seats.
Vamos a dar inicio en instantes.
We will start the closing panel presently.
Si nos hubieran dicho esa plaqueta, la comentábamos ahora. Una pena.
No lo sabía.
Estamos listos entonces para dar inicio.
So I think we are now ready to start the closing panel.
Para salir. Ah, perfecto.
¿Y los nuestros?
No sé, que alguien te diga si están o no están allá adentro.
Chicos, lo nuestro. Sale el diputado. Los invitamos a tomar ubicación.
Please take your seats.
Parlamentarios y parlamentarias, damos
Ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, we are going to start the closing session of the 14th Parliamentary Assembly Eurolat. And it will take place in the Honourable Chamber of the Deputies of the Argentine Nation. In this closing session, we have participation of Adolfo Rodriguez Sá, National Senator, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Argentina, and Vice President of Eurolat and member of the Argentine Parliament. Also, the Member of Parliament for Argentina, Eduardo Valdez, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chamber of Deputies, Mr. Javi Lopez, the co-president of Eurolat on the European component, and Oscar Dario Spineza, who is the co-president of the Latin American Eurolat component. I'll give the floor to Eduardo Valdez from the Argentine Parliament.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming to Argentina, for having held your meetings here, for coming to this chamber. On behalf of the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, Sergio Massa, and on behalf of all of the authorities, it's I'm very proud to say that this session has been held here in our chamber. I would like to offer my words of greeting to all members from the European Parliament, to members of the various Latin American parliaments. My heart lies in Parla Sur, and I think there I learned the importance of international parliaments and dialogue between members of parliaments from different regions. The title, Economic Recovery, which is just and inclusive and in peace, which has been chosen for this session. Seeing that title, I think I realized that we need to have a lot of meetings. Parliaments have more horizontal dialogue. They can and should look for these types of solutions, which sometimes the executive branch in the day-to-day hustle and bustle don't always achieve. My feeling is that the world needs dialogue between regions, but that when in a dialogue what you say is no more important than what you hear. Hearing, listening is also very important. Some of the decisions that you took showed that there were disagreements between Europe and Latin America, and what was necessary was more dialogue to see whether you could find a shared vocabulary. In Argentina, in 2014, as Christina Kirchner said, we condemned the aggression against Crimea. We voted with the United States. Perhaps today what we need is more dialogue to avoid war. Dialogue should have been used to ensure that this war, which saddens us and is all the more emotive in Europe, could have been avoided. If I may, I would just like to share some words of Pope Francis, who, of course, is very dear to us. Those who manufacture arms are damned, as are those who sell them. because wars only damage the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Nacional.
And I give the floor to Eduardo Valdez. And I'll now give the floor to Adolfo Rodriguez Sa, a senator. Thank you. I just have a minute to chair this session here in Argentina. This is a moment of extreme pride for me. I'm doing this as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Senate. First of all, heartfelt thanks to all members of Parliament who have come to our country which is so far from the people that you represent in terms of distance, but which nonetheless opened its heart to welcome you. I'd like to thank all of you who have come, staff, officials, all of the logistics teams, who have made you feel comfortable here in our land, and work to ensure that the committees and the Parliamentary Assembly can do their work effectively and to achieve the positive results that we're seeing. We are here together today. We are representatives elected by people of over 1.1 billion citizens. And we've realized that the world is facing the same problems. We have the same fears, concerns, anguish, pain. Our challenge is not just to look for possible solutions, but also to be active in our respective chambers in order to ensure that the solutions, that the outcome are also shared and joint. The motto of this meeting was a fair, inclusive recovery. Recovery should not just be based on convenience, but on confidence, on trust, with the human being at its heart. How we can strengthen the resilience and capacities of each region. We want to see a just economy, one that is aware of the absolute necessity to condemn extortionate financial speculation and financial abuses. This leads to economies based on growth that merely exacerbates inequalities in opportunities. And so here we want to make proposals that will give hope and breathe hope into the hearts of our people. The economic recovery must be inclusive, in strict respect of human rights. We want to see a biodiverse and pluralistic recovery, where we focus on the Green Deal and future generations, focusing on the multi-ethnic makeup of the communities that we represent. This is one of the key assets that we have in promoting creative solutions, ones which will drive respect and dialogue. Inclusion has transformative potential in our times, and our economic recovery should also take place in peace. There was a conference in UNESCO which had a resolution whereby it said that peace cannot only be seen as the absence of conflict or of armed conflict. It is above all a process of progress and justice and respect. It should guarantee the construction of a society in which every individual finds their own place and has the material intellectual resources that they are due. Presence of order or lack of war constitute the necessary conditions for this, but are not in themselves sufficient for peace. Therefore, this Parliamentary Assembly should become a driver for peace. We have to be key players in constructing and building peace. Peace not just understood as an absence of violence, but as justice, equity, democracy, positive relationships and cooperation, and above all, development. The final document from the co-presidents has a specific chapter which I think is very symbolic and is the result of work based on consensus and dialogue. It refers also to Malvinas. I have personal experience. Yesterday we had an event in the ministry on the topic of Malvinas. And I heard a word that I hadn't heard before. And it was said that Malvinas are Argentine. I hadn't heard that from foreign mouths before. This is what we have been saying. We have been taught by our forebears that Malvinas are Argentine, and I was absolutely moved and overcome with emotion. And the fact that this is in the document, and we've been allowed to tackle this topic. Malvinas and peace in the South Atlantic are of huge value, and this is extremely important to Argentina. Thank you all for everything that you've done. I now give the floor to, that was Adolfo Rodriguez Sá, who is President of the Foreign Affairs Committee on the 7th and co-Vice President of Eurolat. In this closing session, I now give the floor to Javi Lopez, co-President from the European component of Eurolat. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Argentine authorities, both the Senate and the Chamber of Representatives, the Congress, who are here today. The reality is that we've worked not just for 4 days, but for a number of weeks now, the members of Parliament and members of Eurolat, to ensure that we have been able to do the work that everyone wants to see from us. The work has had to continue during the pandemic, which for 2 years meant that we've not been able to have a meeting like this for the last 2 years. But we knew we wanted to meet together again, and so therefore we'd like to thank all of the technical teams and the Secretariat for the work that they've done, the Secretariat from the Latin American component as well as the European, the Chamber authorities who've been working very hard here in recent months in order to ensure that we could meet here to discuss, debate, talk, and send out messages, political messages. There are a number of points I want to make. I want to express satisfaction that we've tackled debates that are important today. First of all, the pandemic. The pandemic hasn't gone away. We are very advanced with the vaccination process in Europe, but we are fully aware that the vaccinations won't work unless everyone is vaccinated, and that a large part of the planet is still fighting coronavirus, and that people don't have access to a vaccine. So we will continue to work on that, demonstrating solidarity it's in terms of justice and our own interest as well. We have to be able to eradicate the pandemic as a whole, and we need to work together to do that. We also looked at the economic recovery. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be simple. The last 2 years have been very difficult for our public institutions. They have been subjected to a lot of demands and a lot of budgetary problems. They've seen fiscal stress due to the pandemic, and now the budgetary problems have only been worsened because of the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. The truth is that we knew that the outcome of the financial crisis of 2008 was worsening inequality in our societies and was incubating or was gestating institutional problems that were going to be seen later down the road. And all of these problems have merely been accelerated over the last 2 years. The third topic we debated was the war, the aggression of Russia towards Ukraine. We discussed it, we debated it. The co-presidents expressed a view, and I think I just have one comment to make. This is a house of words. They are for debating, discussing things. We are representatives of different regions. We represent diversity, plurality, but at the same time we have a duty to try to find agreements in these shared areas. It's our responsibility now. It's not easy, and there are contradictions. We know that that's politics, and it's the same everywhere. You have to allow space for everything. Very different points of view. There will be political conflict, which is necessary for a society. There should be expression for political differences in a society. However, at the same time, politics and parliaments have a duty to reach agreements on topics where it's necessary. And I think that's we have this duty. Dialogue isn't just about speaking, it's about listening. Listening to other people, listening to those who think differently from you. But agreement is done through trust and empathy, which is a little different. Empathy and trust, because of course we see the world and we live in the world from different viewpoints. Because of our history, because of our current circumstances, our past, this is an undeniable truth. And this leads to differences of opinion between us, between our parliaments. We're a parliament with over 700 members, and I can promise you that the debate is very rich and diverse. But at the same time, it's our duty to listen to others and to understand them. As legislators, when we come to Argentina to listen to their point of view on Malvinas, it's our duty and our responsibility to listen to countries who are asking for patent waivers. And this is something that our Assembly has done on a number of occasions. We're seeing bloodshed return to European soil, millions of forced displacements, something that we haven't seen since the Second World War, that also requires trust and empathy. War is always complicated. It's the worst possible vision of man. That's what war is. However, we must be cautious because in life, you have to listen to others. War is not like that. This is not how war works. It's not that if two people don't want it, it can't happen. And so what's important is for us as an international community to try to find common ground. A common ground is in multilateral spaces, spaces where we have laws, institutions. This is what we believe. There are some countries in the world who feel safer in imposing their will. We don't work like that. We believe a lot can be improved, but when it comes to imposing our will, that is not what we do as Europeans. We work through trade, through diplomacy. We use words, the language of cooperation, investment. Of course, perhaps we should learn to speak other languages as well. But our shared language has to be that of multilateral institutions, the UN, the language of law. That the world can't work based on who's the strongest. Nobody can impose their choice on someone else's. People have freedom and sovereignty to choose their own fate. And this is our claim today. That's all we want. This is our demand today. And what we've seen clearly in the debate in recent days, and it's something that's very important for us, respect for international institutions and laws, UN resolutions, respect for human rights. It can't, however, you can't pick and choose. You can't cherry pick. We can't have human rights in some places or not in others. Or we can't use human rights to attack other people politically. That's how we understand things. Because we tackle things from the universalism, the dignity of everyone, with rights and the right of every individual to choose their destiny. And so we have to try to ensure that we aren't selective in our position, say, oh, we like this, we don't like that. It won't work. And so as members of the European Parliament, this is how we see things. And we know that these kind of spaces allow us to dialogue, to learn, to talk, to learn from everyone. I'm the first one to learn. Because listening is the only way you can empathize. If you don't listen, then there will be no empathy. Yes, we welcome everything that we share, that we have in common, and there are a lot of those. However, the challenge we face now is a world in turmoil. And so perhaps this will be my concluding words. If we're honest, both of us, both sides, then I think that we're all running the same risk. Which is that the way the world is going will marginalize us. We'll be left on the margins, and the world will carry on as it wants. And we, the Europeans, will be left out. That institutions will be left out, and the main powers will choose what they want. And so we have to do joint work based on shared values around the world, around universal values. Democracy, human rights, the desire to have institutions and shared laws. We have to work based on alliances to defend our people. And I think this is a path we can tread together. And that's why cooperation between the EU and Latin America is so important. We believe that interparliamentary dialogue such as this one is so one. This is why association agreements are useful tools. This is why we believe that we have to win back spaces to have Europeans at SALAC meetings, to have regional meetings in Latin America, because it's much easier to work together as blocks when we work with Latin American institutions and with the European institutions. Because there's a risk that we want to avoid. This is my own personal reflections now. I hope that these spaces of talking, of pluralism, can help to build trust. It's always very difficult to build this trust, but I hope that these institutions will help us to increase in our empathy and will help us to move further down the road in building common shared areas and solutions to the challenges and threats which are not few today. Europe is seeing threats on its own land, on European soil, so we have to work together for the good of our people and humanity. And this is something we will continue to do because, unfortunately, there's a great deal of work ahead of us. Thank you. That was Javi Lopez, the co-president of the European side. And to conclude the 2022 Eurolat meeting, I'll give the floor to Oscar Dario Perez Pineda, who's the co-president on the Latin American side component.
No.
Thank you. I don't think I can add very much. Just a couple of thoughts. Eurolat exists because both the Europeans and the Latin Americans need each other. There is mutual need for one another. Otherwise, this dialogue would be worthless. It would have no reason to exist. We need each other economically, for trade, but also socially, politically, strategically. There are a great range of areas where we need to ensure bi-regional cooperation. I don't want to speak in any more depth about what's already been said about our topics. It was important for this forum to send out an opinion and declaration on the enormous, tragic situation that we're seeing between Russia, Ukraine, and the rest of the world. Because we are going to be affected by it as well. As Josep Borrell said, of course this is going to be the case. Because when it comes to food, inflation, energy costs, fuel costs, agricultural goods, nothing is unlinked. If you look at the tangible, palpable consequences that the FAO itself has expressed a huge concern about, when you have 2 billion people around the world that are at risk of a disastrous situation in social terms, possibly a famine, a possible famine. We have to contribute, we have to do something. We can't just do everything based on strategic calculations. There is something in the co-president's declaration. There is a point that refers to this terrible situation. The title of this 14th Assembly is a fair economic recovery. What does that mean? That means that the economic recovery has to also cover the social aspect. That it should be a recovery for all, not just for the rich, as we've seen for a number of years in the world. That's what gives rise to inequality, poverty, and lack of access to public resources. And everything that the state can do to benefit its citizens. As well as being fair, it has to be inclusive, not exclusive or abusive. Inclusive means that it should lead to symmetry, balance. We need to have symmetry. For instance, public debt. I know that the European component, or at least the majority of European countries, if not all, don't know what debt is. Very few have had to run this debt. They have abundant income with positive balances. Our countries have been desperately hit by the pandemic, and public expenditure has increased massively. Social expenditure, economic aid, to avoid people dying from hunger. Some have seen it as paternalistic subsidies. Call it what you will. However, we had to act. We couldn't leave people in poverty, stuck in their houses. This was all public expenditure. Public expenditure can only be funded through public debt or through tax or through income. There are very, very few donations. Yes, they're very welcome when they come, but it's not something that we can really rely on in our budgets. The only thing that is constant is debt, and we've had to take on more debt to finance this public expenditure. This has led to huge deficits, huge budgetary deficits. There isn't a single economy in Latin America which is not being affected by this huge, onerous public deficit. And this is the title of what we're talking about today. What can we do to put an end to this public deficit that is leading to poverty, suffering, has partially eliminated the middle class, and which is affecting the most vulnerable sectors of our population. There's huge unemployment, and we have to provide responses to that. So public expenditure is increasing, and we're seeing inflation, we're seeing a lack of productivity, and also production itself. Our countries have not been able to produce the food that we would usually. In my country, 35% of our agricultural imports come from Russia and Ukraine. What are we going to do to produce our food without these products? If we have less of this, then it means we're going to produce less. We're going to have that's going to drive up prices, and the situation is going to be very difficult indeed, and we have to prepare for that. We have to set out a path towards greater symmetry, greater similarity with those who are economically better off. If we ask for loans, it's not that we want them, it's not that we want to take on debt, it's because we don't have any other economic alternative. The risk qualifiers, we can see that the risk ratings for our countries change overnight. You don't have this same level of investment. We saw this happen in Colombia for 2 risk ratings, no investment, even when there'd been agreement that there would be. And what's the effect of not having this investment? Investment leaves, capital flees, interest skyrockets, there are fewer resources, And this leads us all to more poverty, more suffering, fewer financial abilities. So the statements that we make have to have content. And we want the international community to understand that. Now, also, you are esteemed European colleagues. You don't experience the difficulties that we experience and live every day. We want you to represent not just the millions of citizens in Europe, but also the millions of citizens in Latin America. Help us. You have the economic ability to do this. You run or manage many financial institutions, the World Bank, the Inter-American Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and so on and so forth. So we want part of this public debt to be converted into social investment for our people. It's not impossible, and it's not a crazy proposal. It's a proposal that we should all listen to. I don't want to go more into this. The first topic has been discussed a great deal. Dr. Eduardo, I wanted to say thank you to you. You are the president of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Chamber of Argentina. Dr. Adolfo Rodriguez works in the Senate, and you represent 45 million Argentine people, and we here represent 1.2 billion people. We were very impressed. We very much welcome the work that you've done in order to ensure that this forum can take place in an appropriate manner. So thank you all. Thank you to you and to all of the Argentine people for welcoming this assembly.
Oscar.
That was Oscar Dario Perez Perena, and this brings the 14th ordinary session of the Eurolat Ordinary Parliamentary Assembly to a close. This took place in Argentina and in our legislative chamber. I ask you to move to our salon to enjoy a performance by the Chamber Orchestra of the Argentine Congress. And then you are invited to the Blue Room, where we will share a toast. Thank you all very much for your participation.
On your seat. Please leave the headphones on your seat. Thank you. Todas las parlamentarias y parlamentarios latinoamericanos. Vamos a tomar una fotografía de familia.
We are going to take a family photograph in the chamber. If you'd be so kind, please stay seated and we'll take a family photo.
Fotografía oficial. Traílos a todos. Pero ellos quieren hacer, sí. Bueno.
Que llamen a los que quieran, pero esto no es oficial. Claro, Charlie se fue. Están haciendo una foto sin